There are some things you just shouldn't do when you're mad. Recording a YouTube video, probably top of that list, but here we are. Thank you for joining. Now, I am a bit angry, and I think a lot of other people are too for similar reasons. My frustration that led me to record this really came in last week when I saw a debate on the Diary of a CEO podcast. And this video was, there's lots of different thumbnails, I'm sure, but it was called An Emergency Debate: The Death of the Middle Class and Only the Top 1% Will Survive. Now, I like Stephen Bartlett's style of interviewing. He's not afraid to ask a question in an ignorant way to get to the very root of the explanation of something. He's not afraid to ask his guests what seem to be stupid questions. He's smart, he knows the answer, but he might ask his guests, tell me what compound interest is, and force those guests to really talk up from the ground what they are passionate about, what they're speaking about, and I think that it pulls the rest of his audience along with him. This debate, I wasn't as much of a fan of, but I do think it's a necessary conversation. This debate was between two people with Stephen moderating. The first is Mark Hanauer. Now, Mark was an early founder, one of the first founders or investors in Amazon. He served on the advisory board in the 90s, put a lot of money into it himself. After that, he founded companies like gear.com. He's not hurting for money at all. And since 2013, he's done a lot of work around just promoting this conversation around inequality and really doing some pretty good work to try and solve this problem. He's sat in the room with some of those policy decision makers, and he's been part of think tanks to help solve this problem. I think throughout this entire debate, he does a good job of staying true to that, having a really balanced and thoughtful and insightful, because he's been on the ultra rich side, but his opinions are just much more balanced and geared towards trying to spread out the prosperity that we've experienced, especially in the US. Across from him was Daniel Priestley. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put my biases on the board before I even introduce him, and I'm going to say I don't like this guy. This guy I have seen in podcasts and debates over the years, and if I'm honest, he's one of the driving forces that made me want to write a book against most of the things that he talks about. I think his intro in this explains exactly where he sits. He'll tell you he came from modest means and he got involved in startups. He started his own companies. He very quickly grew them with the hustle bro type culture, sleep on the office floor type mentality. Since then, he's founded and grown other businesses, and now he teaches a course to entrepreneurs to help them do the same. I'm sorry, but if you pitch your course in your intro, you've lost a lot of credibility in my eyes already. Thanks, hustle bro. But aside from my dislike from his stance, he has a pretty consistent narrative. He says he very much doesn't like government involved. He thinks a lot of the taxes are squeezing small businesses. He believes that everyone should pursue ownership of land and property and assets, ownership of businesses. And that is how he suggests everyone should go about living their economic life: ownership. To do that, he wants government out. He is very much against wealth taxes. He often takes the side of, if we tax the rich, they will leave, and it's going to hamper actual economic development and creativity. I simultaneously, because this is a long debate and I needed to take breaks, but I also came across Gary Economics, his new video where he talks about the same mentality appeared in The Economist magazine, that taxing the rich could lead to lower creativity and lower overall just economic production. And I think he does a much better job than I ever could of combating that narrative. So I encourage you, if you listen to one, maybe listen to the other too. I'm not going to give you the link or anything else. They're big enough, but I do encourage you, go find it and check it out. But I actually don't want to talk too much about this specific debate because this debate is a byproduct of a bigger conversation that's happening right now. A lot of the ultra rich and the mega CEOs, they seem to be going on a PR campaign right now. Whether it's Jeff Bezos in his recent interview where he says taxing him more money won't help that teacher in Queens. Whether it's Elon Musk finding creative ways to get his new IPO into index funds, making all of us, quite frankly, a part of his company. That's pretty unique. Or pick your story of corrupt politicians or investments and private equity and all those other things. All of them are leading to the same conversation. And if you are trying to play the stock market, maybe invest in a hardware store because they might be running out of pitchforks pretty soon. And I think that that is what all of these CEOs are really trying to combat. They're obviously trying to get ahead of something. They see where this is going. They're partly scared and partly it feels like they're trying to pull some bigger trick on the general public. But that's just one guy's opinion. But in this video, I want to do something a little different. I'm going to put some facts and figures up on the screen. I am going to put up the statistics and the state of things that I would actually like to hear the ultra rich people address. Because in all of these interviews, they get T-ball questions where they get to be flippant about how they feel about the general public. I would actually like to hear some of these people defend these stats and statistics. And then at the end, I'm going to share the questions that I would like to hear because these are the statistics that actually make me angry. And I think that you'll resonate with that. So that being said, we can dive into that. So the US as a whole, 4.2% of the global population, and we possess 34% of the world's wealth. So we are obviously doing pretty well for ourselves. When you look at some of the other major players in this, you have Europe. They have 9% of the population of the world and represent 31% of the wealth. And China has 17% of the world's population and represents 20% of the world's wealth. That means that 70% of the world's population, all these other countries, represent 15% of the entirety of the world's wealth. That is inequality baked in on a global scale right away. But when we talk about this inequality from country to country looks very different. The Gini coefficient, if you don't know what that is, it's simply a representation of inequality inside of a country's economy. The gap between the top and the bottom and how much it's felt. The US falls more or less in the middle. A 1 is impossibly unequal, where a score of 0 is going to be the most equal society. US ranks in the middle with a 0.42 Gini coefficient. Not the worst, but not the best. I put some of the other countries on here as well, but you can see China, better than us, 0.36. Russia, 0.36 as well. Canada's a little bit better, and Europe, 0.29, and India, who didn't even make it on that list of, countries that hold the most wealth, even though they have a very large population, their Gini coefficient is 0.26. The countries that are doing worse than ours are ones like South Africa and Brazil, but the gap isn't even as close between the US and South Africa as it is the US and India. And I think that that speaks to a really big fundamental problem that we have when we talk about having the most wealth and also having some of the biggest bouts of inequality, we have some problems here. But when we get into a breakdown of wealth, in the US alone, the top 0.1%, normally you see the top 1% and you'll see it broken out, represents about 30% of all of the wealth in the US. But what I don't normally see is the top 0.1%. This is 3,500 people. They hold 14.5% of all the wealth in the US. 3,500 people. When you compare that to the very bottom half, 17 million people, those 17 million people collectively hold 2.5%. When you're in the middle, you see a bit more of an equal distribution with, the top 10%, they're holding about 40-ish percent when you exclude those top 1%. And then the middle represent about a third of the entire wealth of the US. The middle class is there, but it really isn't as middle as we think. It's more upper middle. 51st to 89th percentile represent 30% of the wealth. That 50th and under is in that 2.5% and probably the only people driving that number up. So I put two graphs up here as well. You can see the groups by population versus the groups with their share of wealth. Most people would expect these to be a little closer to the same, but really what we're seeing here is two groups absolutely dominating the population, and they are not the groups that are dominating how much wealth is held. And I don't really have a massive problem with that. I'm going to have to create a follow-up video that talks about, how I feel about the billionaires. Are billionaires evil? Yes or no? I'm typically not going to jump straight to the billionaires are evil, but that's for a later video. What I do think starts to represent this problem is the tax rates. And this is what everyone is talking about. So if we're just looking at those top 10% of earners, so we're talking all those top 10%. These are people that probably make, about $2 million or more a year. They have an effective tax rate of 14%, and depending on what assets they own and businesses they own, they could be subject to 27% taxes, including everything. Now, the average American, on average, has a 27% tax rate on just earnings. That's almost twice what that top 10% is paying in. So that's a bit of a problem. But when you follow it up with statistics like the average American will pay 35% of their lifelong earnings on taxes, that becomes a problem. And maybe not a problem on its own, but it certainly is a problem in contrast. 35% of lifetime earnings. So this is not just their wages, but it's also the sales tax that they're probably going to pay on everything. It's also the taxes that they're going to pay on Social Security. It's the taxes that they're going to pay if they sell and manage their house. All of those things, these are driving up the tax rates for average people because they don't have access to the same levers to reduce their tax burden as people at the top. But that contrast that I'm talking about, most ultra wealthy people have a true effective tax rate of less than 5%. Now, I started seeing a lot of these numbers coming out around 2018. They would surface every now and then before that, but we seem to publicly really start paying attention to these numbers around 2018. There's a great article, I may include it, that just talks through some of the actual tax rates that people were paying in 2018, 2019, 2022, and they're all under 5%. I have to point out one thing though. In this recent interview with Jeff Bezos, he says, I pay billions of dollars in taxes. And there is a bit of truth to that. Last year, Jeff Bezos paid over $2 billion in taxes because he sold about $13 billion worth of stock. So capital gains taxes and all those things, they finally came up, and he did pay billions in taxes last year. But what that leaves out is most of the years before that, he paid effectively nothing. He paid so little in taxes because he was doing the typical living off the shares and the loans and everything else that helped him evade these taxes for years. Legally evade. I'm not saying that it's criminal other than morally, but just the fact that he paid last year does not change the fact that he historically has not. Same with the Musks and the Bloombergs, all these others. They do pay a significantly lower tax rate. Now, in 1950, this is coming out of the war, and I think most people can agree that this is when America, as we see it today, really started taking off and shaping into what we have become. During this time of extreme growth, the tax rate on the top 1%, that would be about $2.5 million annually right now, but that tax rate on paper was 91%. And even though people still did a lot of stuff to minimize their tax burden, that real tax rate still ended up above 40%. And so that is definitely something that's on the table. We've done it before, we can do it again. And it didn't stop any of the progress that happened post-war that led to this economy that we have now. Another thing is statutory corporate income tax at this point in time, 21%. Most Fortune 100 companies pay between 13 and 19%. We cannot excuse the fact that the largest companies are still paying less taxes because they have the resources and means to the things they need to lower their tax burdens. But what doesn't get tossed around in all this is federal lobbying was about $5.3 billion in 2025. $5.3 billion. And all of that is a tax write-off. They're spending all this money to change the system in their favor and getting a tax write-off to do it. This is the kind of stuff that makes the pitchforks come out. They are creating the unfair system that is really hurting everyone else and only benefiting them. So let's talk about Daniel's position here a bit. Now, he is very much, you should go start your own small business. You should do this. This is the way to make money these days. Now, I've said it in lots of videos, but I really have to hone this in. Now, if we look at the small business survival rate, now I would normally put it as the failure rate and flip it around, but this is the survival rate of a company when it starts, especially a small business. After the first year, about 20% of all small businesses, they're going to just fold up. After 5 years, only about half of them will be left standing, and only about 65% of small businesses last longer than 10 years. And here's the real thing. This is where Daniel's math just really, I cannot get on board with it. Aside from the fact that he's an employer himself, and if everybody worked for themselves, I don't think he would have employees. But the average pay for a small business owner is $78K annually, with lots more stress, headache, work, all of those things, taking less money to simply say that you own something. There's a big payout, obviously, that can happen on the other end of that. You can have a successful business and your cap can be potentially limitless. But that's not what the average numbers come out to. Really, being a small business owner means that you make an average wage. You just do it differently than everyone else. You're going to pay more taxes, you're going to have more expenses, and you're most likely going to work more hours. There are obvious exceptions to that rule, and everyone that teaches a class on this is going to disagree with me. But when you look at the actual pay that's being reported, all of those reasons kind of go by the wayside. The median for employees or employers, let's say they're small businesses that have other employees, they can obviously get more things done. They have higher rates of revenue, so therefore they're going to have a little bit higher pay. But that median, not even the average, the median is only $110,000. The median for solopreneurs, these are people that run their own business, $24,000 a year. Most of these are probably side hustles, and that's why it's low. But nonetheless, they still get recorded as solopreneurs, and they're making $24,000 a year. That's hardly enough to quit your day job for, especially when you look at statistics like the US average salary is $68,000 a year, the median $63,000 a year, and the median personal income, which is going to be more or less comparable to the solopreneur route, is $45,000 a year. So when you're talking about the exact rates that you're getting paid, plus the hours that you put in and the benefits that you get from being an employee, when I started my own business, nobody told me, and I mean, obviously you can find it, but your employers pay a percentage of your income tax. When you are a solopreneur, you are responsible for paying all of that. So your tax rate actually goes up on an individual level. So I don't understand the idea of pushing everyone to entrepreneurship as long as they're going to be like this. And I'm sorry, but it's not the tax system that is holding people back here. It is simply the way that the markets these days are going to work. Now, we're going to start getting into some of the stuff that I just cannot ignore. And they didn't bring it up in this conversation. And I rarely hear it in conversations when we're talking to the ultra rich. In 2026, the official poverty line for a 4-person household is $33,000. I did a whole video on this, but $33,000 for a family of 4 is the poverty line. That's where you get to get government assistance. We've pushed that number down to 11% in the US. But here's the thing. In 1960, adjusted for inflation, the poverty line was at $34,000. And 22% of the population qualified for these extra benefits. Things cost differently then, and that's a real issue. 10% of our population is needing assistance, and they're below the poverty line. Right now, just the statistics that I pulled recently, we have 7.3 million unemployed people in a traditional sense. These are people actually getting unemployment checks. But there's a different number that's in here, and that's the broad unemployment rate. These are people that may not be on unemployment benefits anymore. They may be long-term unemployed. They may be severely underemployed and doing gig work. That's looking more like 8%. And the employment to population ratio, less than 60%. So what that is actually telling me, if I trusted the numbers, is that there is a large bit of the population that's really hurting for work at this point in time. As these unemployment numbers tick up, I've heard in numerous places that where people at the top start to get a little wary of the unemployment numbers, a little scared like they should do something, is between 6 and 8%. Because at that point, people start to feel the pain. People start losing their homes. People start having to depend on others, stretching out the need farther and farther. This is a real problem. And it's only amplified by the fact that, I'm sorry, but I can't trust the Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers any more than I could China's or Russia's or North Korea's at this point in time. They are very clearly being manipulated in a positive sense to minimize what the actual on the ground sentiment is. And then the last thing is around housing. 100 million people, or 46 million households, rent their homes. That's 32% of the population. And the average rent, now this number is all over the place depending on where you're getting it from. The Census Bureau says it's around $1,400 back in January. I recently saw something from Zillow that said the average rent is looking more like $2,000 a month now. Whenever you're looking at that rent, you have to have, most of the time it's 3 times your rent in wages coming in. That means that the average person needs to make $63,000 to $90,000 a year on their own before they even qualify to rent somewhere. Compare that to the average and median salary that we just talked about a few minutes ago. Most people aren't meeting this. So clearly we have reached the point where housing is very fast becoming unaffordable, and it's showing in eviction rates. There are 3.6 million eviction cases each year in the US, and this number is going up. And as that number goes up, people are buying these houses and they're renting them out. And based on where market rates are and everything else, it's just driving everything higher. There is no way out for a lot of people when it comes to housing these days. So I want to talk about these statistics that actually make me mad, and they should make you mad too. And I think this is really what people are talking about. These are the questions and facts that I want to hear the people making billions of dollars a year actually answer to. There are 2.9 million children that face eviction. And something that I learned recently is that an eviction, whenever that happens, whoever's evicting can name the children as residents. And an eviction stays on your financial record forever. So an infant can be named in an eviction, and 30 years later, when they're trying to buy a house, it's still going to show up and hold them back. If we think this is okay, I think we have a lot bigger problems, because this is 4% of the childhood population. We show that we have about 770,000 homeless people in the US. These are just the ones that are done at a point of contact count. And that represents 0.2% of our population. That number seems really small until you look at the fact that it's 771,000 individuals, humans, people that are homeless right now. We served over 1 million people in shelters last year. That's 0.3% of the population. But let's really talk about this. There are 1 million homeless children. 1.3% of all children, that's over 1 in 10. This number, this was actually the number that I was exposed to that started making me think about all this. I did a local community thing, and they talked about the 1 million homeless children in the US. This is just what's reported by schools. These are children that are bused from shelters to schools, underperforming schools, no doubt, but this is how they got that number. The actual number of children that are experiencing homelessness year over year is actually closer to 2.5 million children. That's 3.4% of the entire child population in the US. This, in my mind, is just, it is unacceptable in so many different ways, and it points to a complete and total failure of the system. Just these two stats alone. 20,500 people died of malnutrition-related deaths. I mean, yes, it's only 0.6% of all the deaths in the US, but related to malnutrition in the richest country in the world, in a country that we throw away almost as much food as we consume. We have people dying from malnutrition. And lastly, a chronically homeless person is going to cost, on average, $35,500 a year. That is higher than the poverty line. It costs more to take care of homeless people in whatever way we're choosing to do that, we have to give them more money than the poverty line is set at. There's something just fundamentally wrong with these statistics. And so, what I would like these interviewers to be asking the people at the very top is how many homeless children are acceptable to have in the richest country in the world? Is, you know, I don't know, 3 out of every 100? Is that an acceptable rate? I don't think so. I don't think that there is an acceptable number here. And as long as we have this problem, there will be a lot of just ill sentiment pointed upward at the people that are doing well. As things continue to get worse for people on the bottom, we are going to have this problem. So I would like to hear all the ultra rich, as they're saying that them paying more taxes won't help anything. I would like to hear them address some of these statistics and convince us that it's okay. Convince us that they need to make that much money and that they can't possibly be bothered with paying taxes into the very systems that enable them to make as much money as they have, to continue to lobby and grow at insane rates while they're cutting people out of their companies, and explain to all of us how them putting more money into lobbying for their companies than we would be paying for all of these people to have homes or be supported and get these children in stable housing situations. Just explain to me where that makes sense. Because until they can answer these questions in an acceptable way, I don't think that the pitchforks are going to stay put up. I think that we are going to have bigger issues and we're going to watch them preparing for whatever is going to happen as society as we know it slowly collapses under economic weight that could be prevented. So, yeah, I am pretty angry. And I kind of hope you are too, but I do hope that we can all agree that there is a path to a better future ahead of us. We just have to advocate for ourselves and those around us. So please leave your comments below. What are your thoughts? Check out the videos. Let me know if I'm just completely off base and all of my fears and worries and anger are just unfounded, because that may very well be the case. But until next time, thank you for tuning in and listening to these rants and raves. And I really do hope you take care. Goodbye. Hey YouTube, thanks so much for joining. If you're still here and you want to learn a little bit more, go to my website, lifeofcompoundinginterest.com, and drop me a contact form. If you want to see any of the sources from the data that I cited in this video, I'm always happy to provide those things. Please don't be a stranger, and we will see you next time. Cheers.